Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Bill Roach. This is another episode of Timeless Dialogues, and today we're going to discuss the topic of how should you read a philosophy book? So many people come up to me and they ask me this question, and I think the reason is because they inherently know philosophy is a difficult subject, and that may be you today. So if this is something that you're looking into because you have a class or you're looking at it for personal endeavors, please listen to this entire video because I'm going to give you several key points of advice on how to approach this very difficult topic. Now, my typical first response to people in a joking fashion when they ask, how should I read a philosophy book, is, well, typically left to right and top to bottom. And they give me a chuckle here or a chuckle there. But the truth of the matter is that we all agree upon the fact that it's difficult to study the discipline of philosophy. Now, that doesn't mean that we should just give up on it, because we all know that several disciplines are very difficult. If you're in the hard sciences, where maybe you study mathematics, you know that it's a difficult endeavor, but there's a reward to all that we've put into it. So what I want you to do today is to sit there, listen to these principles, and hopefully it will encourage you to take on the pursuit of the study of philosophy. So what I want us to look at first here is that the first step in understanding that philosophy is something that we must approach, and the right way to read philosophy is to realize that it's a difficult subject. And some of you might be thinking, well, Lottie frickin' duh. And in general, I would actually agree with you. You might think, well, we all know that it's a difficult subject. So what difference does that make in me actually learning how to read philosophy? Well, first of all, it helps you estimate the task that's before you. If you're going to go walk a mile and it's a flat plain and it's a cool day, it's not going to be that difficult. But if somebody tells you it's going to be hot, it's going to have a huge incline, there's going to be a rocky soil to it, and it's going to take you all day, you're going to prepare for it in a different fashion. And I think that's how people need to look at the topic of philosophy. Some people hear that and they're completely, utterly taken back by it. It intimidates them. But what I want you to do is I want you to be encouraged by it. I want you to see that you have to understand the opponent and the task at hand in order to rightly approach it. And as you're studying the discipline of philosophy, there's this old saying that there's no philosophy without crying. And the reason is that it's a difficult endeavor. But note this, just like physical endeavors, just like the hard sciences are sometimes difficult, sometimes life is difficult, but there can be a great reward to it. So if you're going to study the discipline of philosophy, know that there can be a great reward to your task. Now, the second thing is a very, very practical set of advice. Some people struggle to read philosophy because they're in an environment where there's just so much going on. They'll hear various things. They're going to hear different aspects of stuff going on. You might even have a couple oddities in the background. You never know what's going on. But what we've got to do is we've got to get rid of the noise. You got to study philosophy in a place where you can actually read. And that might mean you leave the coffee shop. It might mean that you read philosophy at home or out on your back porch. Or it might mean that you're not in the downtown area where you sometimes have no clue what might be going on. But you need to find a cool, calm place to actually read philosophy without distractions. Now, my next piece of advice that I want you to see when it comes to studying philosophy and in order to approach philosophy is that in order to actually read a philosophy book, you need to actually know how to read a book. Now, some people might think that's not a very profound insight, but it truly is. I can't expect somebody to be able to read the discipline of philosophy if they lack the ability to just read a book in general. So how do I go about this? First of all, when you read a book, I would highly recommend that as you pick it up, look at the table of contents. Go and look at the index that's in the back. See the big topics and the big picture and the big flow of where they're going with it, because it's going to give you a map. Now, if you're going into that text and you're seeing different things like, I don't know these particular words, grab a dictionary, pick it up, take that word and write it into the book that you're reading with the definition next to it. So then you can carry that book with you wherever you're going. Now, the next thing that I like to do is, once I get the key terms and the big topics, is that I like to take the book itself and skim the initial chapters. I want to see the flow. I want to see the big picture. I want to see the whole map of where that book is going. And I'll do that with every chapter of the book so that I can see where the author is going in the beginning and in the middle and where they're finally going to land the plane at the end. Now, the reason that we do this is that we want to grasp the big picture, but that's not the key point yet. As you start to read a book, you don't read a book for its flowery language or its esoteric philosophical thought. You read a book and you judge it according to its arguments and its thesis. So as you're going through, you need to keep asking, what is this author arguing for? How do they actually situate themselves in the current dialogue, and what position do they take? Now, I want to look a little bit more at this issue of situating themselves in the current dialogue. It's just like sitting down at a family reunion. You may have all of these different people in your family, and you know how they're going to approach a particular topic. And you need to know how crazy Uncle Fred and Aunt Susie and crazy Bob and all the different ones that are there approach whatever issue is at hand. And we need to do the same with philosophy. Why? Because we have to understand the history and the dialogue that's taking place. And we're going to get that by skimming the book, understanding the topic, seeing the key figures. So here is my next piece of advice when it comes to studying the discipline of philosophy. To start reading philosophy, you sometimes actually have to read books about philosophy. So what I mean by that is that you don't necessarily want to go out and pick up Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, Locke, and all the rest. Sometimes the best thing to do in order to read philosophy is to pick up a good history of philosophy. You have single volumes, and I've got other videos that I link to for books that I recommend, or a good introduction to philosophy. And what these are going to do is they're going to give you an even bigger map of the entire discipline. So instead of just jumping into your favorite philosopher and having no clue where they stand in the history of ideas or a particular topic, and you don't even really know who, what, when, or where that topic falls in the grand dialogues of philosophy, it's not really going to help you. So the best place to start is with a good book on philosophy, such as an introduction to philosophy or a good history of philosophy. Now, another piece of advice that I give people is that you're going to go into a bookstore or you're going to go into your library and you're going to literally see hundreds, if not thousands, of philosophy books. And you might think to yourself, what should I do and where should I go? Well, after you've read your history of philosophy and you understand a good introduction to philosophy, what I would recommend is that you read the primary thinkers. You don't need to read all of the secondary guys or the ones that write crazy books on random topics. You need to read guys like Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Kant and Hume and Locke and all these other key figures. And you sometimes don't need to get caught up on the secondary ones. And the reason is that these main philosophers are the ones that, in many respects, they shaped the conversations. And a lot of these secondary philosophers, while they can be important, they're really just footnotes on some of these key figures. In fact, that's why they sometimes say the history of philosophy is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato. Why? Because sometimes they're adding to him, subtracting to him, modifying him, agreeing with him, or any other means of which they're continuing this great dialogue in the history of philosophy. But the point is that you need to read the main figures for the main ideas, especially if you're first starting out. Now, if you're a professional philosopher, you have to dive into some of those secondary resources because that's part of your job and that's part of your discipline. Now, stick there. What I want to do here is I want to say this, my next point. To read philosophy, you must be able to understand and state the author's argument. Note this, the first step in philosophy is not to criticize, it's not to evaluate, it's none of those things. It's to properly state what the person is arguing for. The first step is not to express yourself in vague language or to sound philosophical to impress your friends or to put out your little blog. The first step in the history of philosophy is this. Look at me, pay attention here. Have you actually properly represented them? Now, people might think, man, that's sort of a dumb observation.
Wow, what a totally amazing, excellent discovery. Not.
And to some degree, I would agree with them, but it's not, because one of the main things that you got to see in the history of philosophy is that so many people misrepresent what the person's actually saying. It's sort of like two people in a marriage. If you don't understand the complaint of the person that you're married to, you're never going to solve the problem or engage in the conversation. So the first step in philosophy is to simply understand what they are saying. Now, the next step of this is that during this, you're trying to understand where they are. You're trying to understand what the big picture is. What logical moves are they making? Are they discussing these topics in a way that's consistent with the way that they defined the terms earlier? Are they using the term the same way throughout their book? Are they intentionally being vague and changing their terms? Now, as you're going through, there's this key thing that philosophers will discuss, and it's this topic of validity and soundness. Now, validity is the argument actually sort of like mathematically correct? If A, then B, A, therefore B. It pertains to the actual structure of the argument. And that's what you're going to learn to do as you're going through your introductions to philosophy. You're going to learn how to structure arguments. And you're going to read the arguments from some of these key figures, and you're going to ask yourself, are they actually being consistent or not? And the next thing is that if they're consistent, you have to ask yourself this question: are they being sound? Is what they're saying actually corresponding to the evidence or the facts of the matter or the reality of which we know? It's another way of saying, is it valid? Does the form of it work? And is it sound? Is the thing actually true? So you're going to look at, as you're doing this, definitions of terms. Are they used the same way? Are there pivotal arguments and key quotes? Are there areas of disagreement within the text itself where maybe he's pitting himself against himself? Or when you're reading and you see him situated with these other key philosophers, is he in disagreement or continuity with them? So in summary, what I want you to see here is that at this step, and we're almost done, remember the key one's coming up, you have to look at what are they arguing for, and can you summarize it? And I give this advice to people is that you actually have to earn the right to critique a person. So in order to read philosophy, you must know how other major philosophers also treat the subject. So if you're going through, for example, and you're reading the early Socratic philosophers and you're reading ancient philosophy, you're going to see a key figure that's going to rise, and his name is Plato. But who's Plato's main student? Well, it was Aristotle. And Aristotle not only was Plato's greatest student, he was Plato's greatest critic. And why that's important is that you have to see not only what the big figures in the history of philosophy are saying, but you also have to understand what the big figures in the history of philosophy are saying about other philosophers. The reason is that they're the movers and shakers. They shape the conversation. They move the dialogue. So you can actually learn a lot of good critiques by reading the critiques of these key philosophers. Now, here's going to be my final two pieces of advice. And these are really just very practical and personal elements that you must embrace. The first one is this: you must earn the right to critique a person. And the reason I say that is that so many people think that they can just publish their little blog, or they can make a video, or they can write their term paper and just say whatever they want. But who are you? Seriously. You need to be able to show that you can rightly summarize an argument, look for consistency, and build your reputation even in the paper itself or in life itself. Some of these key figures, such as Plato and Aristotle and Hume and Kant and Descartes and all the rest, they were able to position themselves as key figures in the history of philosophy for a reason. It's because they're some of the most brilliant people the world has ever seen. And I'm not trying to demean me or you or anybody else that's out there, but you have to earn your place at the quote philosophical table. You can't just brush them off as some fool who doesn't understand what they're talking about. You must earn your right to actually critique a person. And that follows steps on how do you actually read a book, lay out their argument, and then you can start to critique it once you rightly understand it. Now, here's my final piece of advice here. And this is the one that I was kind of building out in the end. And I want you to follow this story with me here. There are several people who are completely, utterly immersed in the discipline of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, for many of you who study martial arts, you know that it's a difficult process. It's something that you don't just pick up overnight. You literally have to trust the process. You have to embrace the process. And it's a grueling process, but there's a reward at the end. Namely, you learn how to fight. You learn how to defend yourself. You learn how to control yourself in a difficult situation. You learn how to be calm under pressure. And so much of that can actually apply to philosophy. If you want to study philosophy, you got to trust the process. You got to put in the hard work. You can't just give up. You got to find a way to remove the distractions and live a life that's in pursuit of the love of wisdom. So just like there's a return on the investment, a personal return on the investment to studying things such as martial arts, there's also a personal, practical, inward, internal, long-term investment to studying philosophy. Namely, it's going to change you. The love of wisdom will turn you into the person who can rightly understand the world that you live in, why you live in the world that you live in, and how to communicate that with others. But the first step is you need to go grab your book, start reading, take the advice of this, and share this video with others. Thank you.